Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important training on ranked choice voting. My name is Emily Paez, and I am the Director of Government Affairs and Civic Engagement at the Hispanic Federation. I am joined by colleagues from the New York City Campaign Finance Board and colleagues within the Hispanic Federation, as well within the Civic Engagement Department. I just quickly want to go over some ground rules, some housekeeping items before we begin. You are all muted upon entry to this webinar, so you'll unfortunately not be able to speak. However, we will be able to have the Q&A function available. So by clicking on the Q&A icon, you're able to submit your questions at any time during this presentation. If there is a question that you agree and there's a former participant who has already asked that question, feel free to like the question, to bump the question up to just show the importance of it. And also feel free to use the comment and chat feature if you would like to leave a comment. And lastly, this video will be recorded and will be sent to everyone upon completion. So first, again, I just want to thank you guys for joining us. As we know, our community is really still managing to meet the day-to-day basics of survival during this health crisis. And so we must not lose sight of this critical year ahead of us in New York City. As we know, 2021 marks the start of a new chapter for the electoral process in New York City. And with the ranked choice voting tool, voters will be allowed to choose up to 5 candidates on their ballots during primary and special elections. Understanding this method of voting is critical as we elect our next mayor, our public advocate, our controller, borough presidents, and 35 out of 51 city council members. So we're very proud today to partner with the New York City Campaign Finance Board to provide you all with the skills and resources necessary to not only inform yourselves, but to help you also amplify this message to our community. It's a little early, it's early in the year, in the month, I should say, for the special elections that will be taking place on March 23rd for City Council Districts 11 and 15th. But we must continue to have this conversation and be able to echo that as the weeks go by, especially for residents living within these districts. So Hispanic Federation also is actually partnering with the New York City Campaign Finance Board alongside national media groups like ABC and Univision to co-host the New York City mayoral debates to ensure that Latino issues are discussed and that our community is properly informed. HF is committed to providing Latinos in New York City with every opportunity to cast an informed ballot. We are going through an unprecedented crisis, as I mentioned, and it is imperative that we have to have a say in who is representing us and making the critical decisions that are going to be affecting our community as we recover from this crisis and will affect our families as well directly. So we look forward to bringing you this resource, and we want to ensure that Latinos in New York City cast their ballots this year. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I will introduce our National Director of Civic Engagement, Mr. Frederick Velez, to provide some few words.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to everyone for being here with us. I'm really excited about this. I'm super happy and super grateful to Omar and Matthew also for being here and being able to share this information. At Hispanic Federation, we did a lot of work in 2020. I know some of us are saying like elections again, but you know, it is what's happening, and local elections are just as important as federal or presidential elections. So this is why we are super happy to be able to provide this resource because as we all know, the method of voting in New York City changed. So for us, it's really important that everyone in our community has this information and that we can continue the work that Hispanic Federation did in 2020, where we reached almost 300,000 Latino voters in New York City. So we're hoping that with your help, we're going to be able to do the same or even greater things this year, and that everyone in our community will understand how this new method will actually make democracy a little bit more that they'll be able to participate more and have their choices matter. So I again just want to echo what Emily said, and I want to thank Omar and Matthew for giving us some of their time, and most importantly, some of these amazing resources so that we can get the word out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Frederick, for those words. And without further ado, what we are all here gathered this morning today is to be informed. I want to thank our special guest, Omar Suarez, Director of Partnership and Outreach at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, for joining us this morning and for allowing us to understand a little bit deeper, what it means, what this new tool is going to look like, and what does this mean for us. So, Omar, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to everyone that's on the call for attending this training on ranked choice voting. I want to say thank you to Emily for extending the invitation initially to put this together, as well as the team at Hispanic Federation, Bennett and Frederick as well. And, I think I'll just quickly introduce myself. Omar Suarez. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Outreach at the New York City Campaign Finance Board. I'll go into a little bit more, but I just want to, we can actually jump right into the agenda on the next slide, so we can lay the groundwork kind of for how the training is going to look. We want to do this, kind of seamlessly and leave room for questions as well. So we're going to touch on an introduction as well as some context for where ranked choice voting came from, and some of the background information on the national level as well. Then going into how it works and what it really is and how it works for voters, as well as the tabulation process. And then go into some of the importance of ranked choice voting, or RCV, I may say, just to save my breath a little bit, RCV, voter education, and how to communicate with the community and with voters about RCV. And then we'll end off just sort of next steps. What are the upcoming election dates, important dates to know, and available resources. And we'll pause for some questions throughout, but we can go into the next slide. And just to kind of give some context for myself, I have been with the CFB since December 2020. Before that, I've worked in a number of different positions in civic engagement, voting and elections. Most recently at Dominicanos USA, where we were also a member of Hispanic Federation, and I had a chance to meet many of you as well. So I'm grateful to be back in this space. And I actually didn't know that much about ranked choice voting until 2019. And I will say I have learned more than I ever thought I would know about ranked choice voting or any type of voting system in the last 3 months. So we can go on to the next slide there. And just a little bit about the agency that I represent, the Campaign Finance Board. At times, it can be a little confusing. What does this have to do with finance? Well, the CFB is a nonpartisan independent city agency. We do manage the public financing program, but we have a commitment and a charter mandate to do voter education. And so that's where NYC Votes comes from. That's our initiative to do voter education throughout the city in all communities, especially communities that are not as engaged in voting or do not have all the resources or the information. And so we can correct that. And so we can go on to the next one. What we do is we sit very closely with policymakers, including the Board of Elections and state and city lawmakers. So we know everything that's happening with elections, and our job is to communicate that information and make sure that voters know everything that's going on with elections, how to participate, and making sure that we're engaging all communities. And we can go to the next one. Part of our work is touching base with community partners such as yourselves, Hispanic Federation, and all partner organizations. We really do need your support to be able to reach communities. You know your community better than a city agency is going to know. And so it's important to work together, collaborate, and figure out how to amplify this message. And so, you know, our goal is to build relationships with groups like yourselves so that we can reach voters in all different communities, including the Latino community. So we can go to the next one. And this is a quick point of clarification on the Campaign Finance Board and Board of Elections, because sometimes there is some confusion or like who does what. When it comes to the BOE, they are the ones that are responsible for implementing this new voting system and for administering elections. So they have a very specific function, whereas ours is we do voter education based on our charter mandate. And our job is to familiarize voters with the new system. So it is different. There are some things that we want to make clear for people, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily have control over that aspect because, you know, how many days of early voting, where poll sites are located, that type of thing, that falls under the BOE. But we can continue on and just laying out some goals for this training. What we want to achieve with you all by the time we leave here today is so that you can understand what ranked choice voting is and how it works, how using this system can benefit voters, where you can find resources and frequently asked questions, how to customize a training like this or something that's maybe more simplified and condensed for your own community, and what the best practices are for training community members. So we can jump right into it. What is RCV? It's, you know, Emily gave a great introduction. It's a new system where voters can rank up to 5 people, 5 candidates on their ballot instead of only choosing one. It gives more of a say in terms of who the final winner is going to be. And I think that's the reason that it was passed. You know, I want to give some context in terms of sort of where this came from or where people use this. If you go to the next slide, we have a map here that shows this system is in place in multiple, you know, almost half the states in the countries, throughout the country, have it at least at the local level. And you can see it's in different parts of the country. So it's a diversity of experiences and demographics. Maine and soon Alaska will be using it at the state level. We have a number of, obviously there's nothing quite like New York City. There is no other comparison for New York City. So anything we do is going to be new and groundbreaking, but we do have some comparison cities such as Oakland, for example, which has a very, very similar percentage of Latinos, African-American, and people of color as New York City, although you may not believe it, but it's actually pretty similar. And so this has been tried and used in other cities that have large Hispanic populations. So I wanted to make that clear as well. And they also use this system in the Oscars, the Academy Awards. So if you like those, you know, they use a similar system as well. So let's zoom back into New York City. Where did this come from? It was passed in a ballot proposition back in 2019. Close to 74% of New Yorkers chose it. And it was because they were not necessarily happy with the prior system, and they liked the voters that went out that day. They liked what ranked choice voting had to offer. So this was something that was selected by the voters, and I'll be reiterating why it's important that we communicate that. When you go out and speak to your communities, it's important that people know where this came from. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that all the green on this map is where the majority of people voted for ranked choice voting. So you can see it would have very broad support throughout the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, really outside of Staten Island, and not the North Shore of Staten Island, but this had broad support throughout the city, including Hispanic communities, African-American, Asian, just a very broad support. So it's important to reiterate that as well, that this was not something that was imposed just from the top. It was selected by the voters and had broad support. And then where we're going to be seeing this and where it's going to be taking effect, we can go to the next slide. This is taking effect January 1st this year. So it's already been used in a couple of elections, specifically in special and primary elections. So if there's a vacancy in a city council race or something similar, we'll use it. It won't be used in general elections, so it's important to make that distinction. We will use it for the city offices, mayor, public advocate, comptroller. Those are citywide, borough president, and city council race. So Emily already went in. We have 35 seats that will be open out of 51, which means that this is going to be a very important election year for our voters. It's not used for federal or state, so we're not going to be using it for president, for governor, state assembly, state senator, any of those. And we won't be using it for the local positions like district attorney and judges. That's important to note because we may have some ballots this June where there's a district attorney race, as well as mayor and city council. And the district attorney race, if it's on their ballot, if it's on the voters' ballot, it will not be ranked choice voting. So we just want to make that clear. And if we go to the next one, in terms of important dates, so we had a couple of special elections last month in June in Queens. We have 2 special election races coming up this month in the Bronx. And in June is when everyone in the city who is registered to vote in a primary will be able to use this system. So those are important dates to know in terms of the timeline. For most voters, it's going to be in June. The special elections it's just been single city council and districts. So it's not that large, but we've been doing outreach to voters in those districts. And ultimately, what this is going to, the biggest change at the high level, what this means is this is going to be, there's no more runoff elections. I don't know if you remember several years ago, we had a runoff election for public advocate. The turnout is incredibly low. It's expensive to run a runoff election. And so this will eliminate that process because the runoff will happen within the tabulation system, which I'm going to explain briefly. And we're going to use the classic sort of single choice election for federal, state, and offices like DA. And for general elections, we'll continue to use the single choice election. So I want to pause if there's any questions at this stage. If not, if so far there haven't been any questions, then we can go to the next one. I think I haven't seen, I think there's something in the Q&A. Oh, someone asked about runoff elections. So the way that this used to work is that in citywide elections, mayor, public advocate, comptroller, if a candidate did not reach at least 40% in the first round of voting, then what would happen was it would go to a runoff, meaning they would take the top 2 candidates, the top 2 vote getters, will go to a second date, a second election on another date, maybe a month later, and voters would go again and vote between just those top 2 so that somebody got a majority. So as I mentioned, the issue with that was that, in that second election on a whole nother day, voters, they didn't want to go out a second time. The turnout was very low. It cost a lot of money to put that election together. Most recently, we had one, I believe, with Letitia James when she was running for public advocate. In 2013, there was a concern that there may have been a runoff with Bill de Blasio and Bill Thompson, but de Blasio got over 40%, so he won with no runoff. But that's the old way that it works, so we won't have that anymore. Now with ranked choice voting, someone will win in the first round on the single day of voting. I hope that answers your question, Sanyi. Okay, if there's not any other, we can go into, this I think is the key right here, because this is gonna be how you explain to voters how exactly RCV works, what their ballot's gonna look like, how they need to fill it out, and how the winner will be determined. This is the heart right here. So this is the sample sort of ballot grid here. If there's anyone that's visually impaired, we're looking at a sort of a grid here that has the candidates A, B, C, D, and E listed on the left side. And then each of them has 5 columns next to them with 5 bubbles next to each candidate. And the way it works is whoever your first choice is, you just bubble in the first column next to their, next to their name. If you have a second choice, you bubble in the second column next to their name. Same thing with third choice, same thing with fourth choice. So up to fifth. You can go up to 5. You don't have to do 5. You can do 1 if you prefer. But it's pretty straightforward. So first, whoever your first choice is, you bubble in the first column, second choice, second column, and so on. It's really the way, that's as simple as it is. And there's some confusion I want to clarify right now, which is here you only seen 5 candidates listed. And we have had some voters that are confused and think that this means, oh, you can only have 5 voters, or you can only have 5 candidates, since I only have 5 choices. But that's not the case. There can be as many candidates as can get on the ballot. If we go to the next slide, I'll show an example of that. On this example, we have at least 8 candidates plus a write-in candidate. And so as in a regular ballot, you can still choose a write-in candidate, and it will work like this. You write them in, you make them your first choice, and then you bubble in second and third choice for whoever are your second and third choice. It's pretty straightforward. I think we're going to get into some of the errors that we have found and that might cause some confusion, but it's as simple as that. First column is your first choice, second column next to your second choice, and so on. If we go to the next one, this right here is an example ballot with candidates from District 15. So this is what the sample ballot that the Board of Elections has released. We have sample ballots for District 11 and 15. For those of you that are doing any work in the Bronx, we can share those as well. But this is what it's going to look like for voters in District 15. Again, it's just the candidate's name, and then they each have 5 bubbles next to them. So the first bubble is for your first choice, second choice, and so on. And then it'll be available in English and Spanish based on the ED. Since this is the Bronx, pretty much every voter is going to have a ballot with English and Spanish at least. If we go to the next one, this is the one that we want to be very careful with. Sorry. I'm going to go over the specific of what District 11 and 15 are a little bit down the line. I have a slide with a map of where those districts are. So this is a key one when voters go and fill out their ballot. We want to make sure to avoid this. Do not give the same ranking to more than one candidate. So you cannot fill out the first column for 2 different rows for 2 different candidates. In this case, it's like an overvote where you vote for more than one person. It's just the machine will reject it. And more concerning is if they're in person, the machine will reject it and the voter will have a chance to fill out another ballot. But if it's by mail, they won't be able to correct that ballot, because once it's out of the secrecy envelope, once they open it at the Board of Elections and take it out of the envelope, they have no way of knowing whose vote that is. So if the machine rejects it, it's just the vote will be lost. So there will be instructions included with the mail ballot, but we just want to make sure that people are clear not to do this. You do not put 2 bubbles in the same column, because the machine won't know who you actually preferred. The same thing on the next one. This is not as bad. It would just be wasting. If you really like candidate B and I want them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because I really like them, it doesn't do anything. You're not giving them 5 votes. You're not voting for them. You only have 1 vote either way. So this doesn't do anything. All that this does is if you're one candidate that you gave 5 of your slots to, if they end up losing and get removed, which I'm going to explain shortly, then you don't have any other vote, or your vote doesn't have anywhere else to go, and your ballot becomes exhausted. So that's a new term. I'm going to explain that on the next slide. You might hear this term coming in around ranked choice voting, exhausted ballot. All it really means is all your choices are that you put on your ballot. If you picked 5, all 5 of your choices. If you only picked one person, your one person lost, and they didn't make it to the next round of counting. And so that means that your ballot's exhausted and you're not able to, your vote won't count towards that last round. All your candidates that were selected were lost or that were eliminated. And so this is actually one of the reasons that we recommend people use their rankings, so to avoid this situation. And this, I think, is what people really want to know is, how is this going to affect how elections happen and how results come in? So this is what the results could look like. Let's say that everyone, the way it's going to count is the BOE will count all votes, election day votes, early votes, mail-in votes. They count all the votes. They count everybody's first choice. And what we've seen in studies is about half the time, this is the result. Somebody gets over 50%. This happens about half of the time that we have in ranked choice voting elections. Somebody wins with over 50% of the first choices, and they win automatically. It's over right there. This is what happened on February 2nd. The one candidate got close to 60%, and they win. That's it. There is no counting. There's no tabulation. They won. Now, this happens about half the time, but now we go to the more complicated scenario, which is in the next slide. This is what happened on February 23rd. Nobody got 50%. And so this was in the old system, whoever got, candidate B, they had the highest percentage, they would have won. But in the new system, this goes through a counting process where other second choices and third choices come into play. So I'm going to just walk through how this would work out. So you see in this scenario, candidate B has 39%. So they have the most, but they don't have 50%. So what would happen here is candidate D, they would be eliminated because they come in last place. They got the fewest votes. So what happens to all the people that voted for candidate D? On the left side, this is an example ballot of somebody that voted for candidate D. What would happen is everyone that voted for candidate D would move to their second option. So in this example, their second option was candidate C. So this person's ballot would then go to candidate C. And that would happen to everybody's that voted for candidate D. They would all go to whoever their second choice is. So those votes then get distributed to the other candidates based on who the second choice was. So you can see in the next one, what happens is all of candidates D's slides were redistributed, and then everyone else gets those votes based on what their second option was. And so everybody else's numbers just went up a little bit. And then that process repeats because now candidate C no one has 50% yet. So candidate C now is eliminated because they're in last place. And that same process repeats where all of candidate C's voters then go to their second option or their next option. And what you get is what happens when you do that is now candidate B is over 50%. If you continue that process until you have 2 candidates, and this process will always continue until you go down to the last 2 candidates. Once you have 2 candidates, it's mathematically impossible that somebody doesn't have over 50%, unless it's an exact tie, which is incredibly rare and would be very difficult. It would statistically be very difficult to get that outcome.
Yeah, Anne just asked that question actually on the Q&A. She mentioned what would happen if 2 candidates are at 50.
Yeah. I believe.
Omar, I'm currently in the process of answering that question right now.
I'm sorry?
I'm currently the process of answering that question right now. There's a provision in New York state law that decides what happens if there's a tie in an election.
Okay,
Thank
you
you,
put that
Matthew.
in there.
Thank you,
I
Omar.
think in one case it was a coin toss or something, but can you put the specifics in there? Thank you. But again, as I mentioned, almost guarantee you're not going to get an exact 50% tied. It was extremely rare for that, and would be very improbable. You know, it's a tiny percent that will happen. There may be a handful of times in the history of elections that it's happened. But we can go into like the main takeaways, which are, as always, you can vote for just one candidate. If you're somebody, I only like one person, this is the only person I like that I can support, I don't like any of the other candidates, you are free to just vote for one person. You can do that. There is nothing stopping you from doing that. But if you go and decide, you know what, maybe I like two candidates, or I like three candidates, or I like 4 or 5 candidates, you can rank them. And ranking does not hurt your top choice. Your vote stays on your top choice unless they get eliminated. Once they get eliminated, then it goes to your second choice. So having a second, third, fourth, and fifth choice does not hurt your top choice. And then more, if you rank 5 votes, it's important to also know that you always only have 1 vote at one time. So if you rank 5 people, your vote goes to your top choice, and it stays on your top choice as long as they're in the counting, as long as they haven't been eliminated. You stay on that first choice. You only move to the second choice once they are eliminated. And then on this last part, I think it's important to touch base on getting results. This last year, we all maybe have a little bit of trauma from waiting so long for elections, and the frustration and waiting for the mail ballots to get counted and for these ballots to be counted. And so we've seen that it can take a while for election results to come in. You know, the way that it works is we will count the election night. The BOE will release election night results for first choices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are full results. They still have to count all absentee ballots, all the early votes, military ballots, provisionals. And so and they have to accept those up to 10 days after the election. So for example, the election that just happened on February 23rd, the BOE is not anticipating having full canvassing and full results until March 10th. So it can take a couple of weeks. It's not because of ranked choice voting, though. It's because of the time that it takes to count every single ballot. The tabulation process is minutes. It's just it's a computer that moves, you know, this person lost, and then it goes, and it's pretty simple, it's straightforward. It's the counting of ballots that takes a long time. So we could pause here again for questions about everything I just discussed. Sonia asked for a packed race like the mayoral race. We can only rank up to 5. It's not that the other bubbles remain, well, yes, you can only choose up to your top 5. In other jurisdictions, it's actually a top 3. New York expanded it to top 5, so it's more actually expansive than other jurisdictions. But the max is 5, yeah. So we do have a lot of candidates for mayor, but unfortunately the limit is 5. And why New York City seats and not state? It's because this was passed at the New York City level. It was a ballot proposition that was passed by New York City voters. And so we could only affect New York City election law. This was not passed at the state level. If we were gonna have this at the full state level, including for governors and stuff, then we would have to pass this at the state level. But it was only passed at the city level. Okay. So just in terms of voter education, why is RCV voter education important? I know on this call, we have a lot of people that do get out to vote, voter registration, voter education, informational sessions, civic engagement. So I don't have to tell you why that's important, but in terms of RCV, you know, what is it? This might change some things. So I want to cover a little bit of what's going to be different here. We have an example in Minneapolis in 2017 when they implemented it. They got over 92% of voters and close to 90%, 89% of voters of color. And Minneapolis is a pretty diverse city as well. Although you might not think of it because Minnesota is, you know, mostly white state, but the city itself is pretty diverse. And, you know, a very high percentage said that they found RCV simple to use. You know, nearly 100% or a very, very small number of ballots were invalid. So 99.96% of ballots were valid. So that helps demonstrate the confidence. And this is an important metric as well. They had 87% rank at least 2 people and 73% rank 3 people for mayor. So I think that's the kind of outreach that we want to get, you know, getting people to use the system, to use their ranks. That's what we want to take advantage of. So let's go to the next, because I think just touching on this point again, you know, ranked choice voting is it's not like it's a whole special different thing like the census, which is a completely different program. This is, at the end of the day, it's voting. You all are doing this work, trying to get people out to vote, increasing voter turnout. You can't get someone to use ranked choice voting if they're not voting. So the first thing is we have to remember is this is still voter outreach. And that has to be put first. It's getting people to want to turn out and vote. Frederick said at the top, you know, some people might have a little election exhaustion. We just had a very, very strenuous 2020 election cycle. You know, people might be like, ya voté, ya terminé con eso. But, you know, and as we do every year, we're going to try our best to get everybody that turned out for the presidential election come out again and vote in local elections, because these local elections actually impact your day-to-day life arguably more than the federal elections. And I think, and we have a lot of research that goes to that. You know, so you mentioned that we have a packed mayoral race. Some candidates are out campaigning. You know, we're going to be seeing more and more advertisements. But most voters really, they tune in 2 to 4 weeks before. That's what we found in our research. So we're still a little bit out, but right now it's a good time to educate ourselves as organizers and groups. So we go to some of the key communication points around this. We did some research with the Center for Civic Design. They are a great organization that does research on kind of like how voters and citizens engage with government and politics. So they kind of broke it down into 3 tiers for what they call the journey, which is the start off, the basics. They just want to know, how do I fill out the ballot? You know, this is the most simple, basic type of information. How do I fill out this ballot? And that's the key piece of information. So everything that we communicate, we include that grid system that has the candidates and then the 5 columns. So we make sure to put that, so they get used to seeing that. It looks very different than a regular ballot. So so we want to make sure that people get used to seeing that. The second thing, a second tier is no more. Why is this happening? Where did this come from? Why do we have more than one choice now? How is this going to impact my favorite candidate? So we want to go into a little bit more. And then the final tier is people that want to know everything. You know, they want to know about tabulation. They want to know about strategy for different campaigns and stuff. So we want to layer things out based on how much information people need to know. You know, a flyer only needs to have so much information, how to fill out your ballot. Whereas when we do a full training like this, we go into much more detail. So we're going to the next one. In terms of the research that we did with voters, we had a focus group that was entirely Black and Hispanic voters. Because these were the groups that we have identified as maybe being less engaged with this RCV process. And, you know, one of the quotes that came out of that is, "This is new, but it's just another way of voting." You know, there are many different voting systems out in the world and in other countries as well. The concept of ranking is something that we all do every day. You know, I think one of the examples I say is, if you can rank your top 3 or 5 favorite cereals, you know, you can do this. If you can rank your favorite basketball player or rapper, you can do it. Now, it's not the same. Selecting a cereal is not the same as somebody that's going to represent you, of course. But in terms of the concept of, you know, what you want first, and how it works, and people want to know why this is happening. So we always make sure to mention that. That this came from a ballot proposition. It was chosen by the voters. And we can go on to the next one as well, because this is just as important, that the message is also coming from groups that are close, that have close ties to their community. And that's why we're here today, to speak with you all and make sure that you have that, that information so that you can provide it to your community. This is kind of the key for us is making sure that we're working with community partners, providing these information in Spanish or in other languages, depending on the community you work in. But let's move on a little bit more. I think we also think it's important to mention some of like why ranking is important. We do want people to use their ranking. Number one, we want people to have an influence on who gets elected finally. If you really only want to use one vote, you can. But if you use your rankings up to 5, you have more of a chance of having an impact on the election. So that's one of the things that we want to promote and emphasize. The second one is, when voters can rank multiple candidates, candidates now have to appeal to the broadest section. In the older system, when somebody could win, you know, let's say if we have 8 candidates or a lot of candidates running in one office, candidates, they might know, I only need to get my voters. I only need to get my 25 or 30%. And I don't need to speak to anybody else or be concerned with anybody else. I just need to focus on my voters that are already with me. But what does this mean? That means that the other 70% of voters get ignored. And when that person gets elected, they don't feel like they have a relationship. In this new system, candidates have an incentive to go and speak to different people and make sure that if they're not your first choice, they want to be your second choice or even third choice. And so that's candidates that can do that and build coalitions are going to be more successful. And that's going to lead to more unity and working across divides. That's what we've seen in other cities as well. And the third one is more diverse candidates, because again, if you have to appeal to a broad spectrum, it opens up the door for more gender and demographic diversity. And we have seen that in other cities as well. And lastly, you know, we want to, from our research and experience, voters just need to understand with a basic explanation how the winner is selected, you know, how the ranking works and how the winner is decided. They like the idea that many candidates will focus on them and it not just be, you know, broken off into candidates only going after one specific community. And they do value the diversity of New York City, and they want representatives that look like the city. And then we're closing up soon. The key takeaways from this is, you know, we have a lot of materials that we were happy to share. We've begun sharing with Emily and the team, and we want to disperse it out to all of you. Again, it's important to note the old primary calendar was in September, so that's a little bit different now. It's in June, so it's earlier, and that's important to note. So we start the planning a little bit earlier to get people out to vote. We do offer a version of this presentation that's tailored more towards voters, and we have that available in English and Spanish, and I'll be sharing that as well with Emily to disseminate. And we say you can customize it however you want, as long as you know, the information is there for you to share with your community. conduct trainings like this that are geared towards your communities. And when you do your get out the vote effort, make sure you're also mentioning that this is what the ballot's going to look like. And finally, you know, we're continually sharing things on social media, sending out a newsletter. So stay in touch with us, and we're sharing a lot of information and resources about this. So in terms of the next step, I want to just speak about the upcoming elections very briefly. You know, what's going to be coming up next. If you look on the next slide, actually, these were the elections that happened last month. As I mentioned, the one on February 2nd, the top one, that one had a winner in the first round, so there was no tabulation. In the second election, no one got 50%, so that one is now going to tabulation in second round. So we don't know. It's actually very close. I believe the top vote getter got about 38%, and the second place winner had about 35%. So that one's going to go down to the wire, and I'm interested to see how that works out. And then on the next slide, these districts, I believe, has much larger Hispanic populations up in the Bronx, and they're coming up on March 23rd. Early voting starts next Saturday. We'll be doing outreach ourselves starting this Saturday because we want to give people a chance to get an absentee ballot if they want. But if you see, I have listed here the neighborhoods, Council District 11 in the Bronx. That is all the way up northwest. So it does have the area of Riverdale, which is like very high income, but it has neighborhoods like Norwood, Bedford Park, Kingsbridge, Wakefield, Woodlawn, have very large Hispanic populations as well. And then District 15, very close to me. It includes also Bedford Park, Fordham, Mount Hope, Bathgate, Belmont, East Tremont, West Farms, Van Ness, Allerton, Allenville. So these are very large Hispanic populations in these districts as well. Again, that's on March 23rd, and early voting will be from March 13th to the 21st. And anyone that's registered to vote can participate in those special elections. The next one, this is the last thing to know, is again, June 22nd. This is when we have the citywide primary. It'll be for mayor, public advocate, comptroller, the 5 borough presidents, and 51 city council races. I believe the number you said earlier, Emily, was 35 are vacant out of 51, which is a huge number. It's going to be a brand new city council. And so it's very important to participate this year. Yeah. And so just to close it out, we have some resources here. We can share these links in the chat as well. We have our our landing page, voting.nyc. That's where we post the voter guide. We post poll site locator, application if you want to get an absentee ballot. Anything that has to do with voting, we post on our landing page there. We have a resource page for ranked choice voting that has a link to sign up for more of these trainings. The slides, the presentations available in multiple languages that you can then use to present to your community. We have social media, graphics, and content, flyers, one-page flyers that are in multi languages as well. And then there's the link to sign up for more training or additional trainings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Omar, for really this invaluable information. I think it's extremely important for us to stay ahead of the curve with organizing our communities. And I just want to kind of really echo what Omar said. For some of the organizations that may be smaller and may not have the bandwidth to perhaps recreate a communications plan around ranked choice voting, RCV, to really utilize the tools that are available and that are out there. And the New York City Campaign Finance Board has a wealth of tools, not only in English, because we know that we are talking about a Latino community. This information is also accessible in Spanish and has talking points that will help us communicate to our community. So really, maximizing on those resources will be great. For everyone who has registered for this training, we will be sharing the resources that Omar has alluded to along with this presentation. So if you would like to share it with any organizers within your organization, or, you know, within other organizations and partner organizations that are within your circle, that you can do so as well. So again, Omar and Matthew, I want to thank you both very, very much for joining us and for having this really, really key and important conversation, because, you know, this is going to be one of many municipal elections that we will be having for years to come. And it's important for us to know what this new system is going to look like. And with that said, I'm now going to turn it over to Vinette Soriano, who is the Civic Engagement Coordinator with the Hispanic Federation. And she's going to talk briefly about some volunteer opportunities within the Hispanic Federation to really get out the vote for those periods that Omar alluded to, which are the early voting period for the special elections happening in districts 11 and 15. I'm actually a resident of district 11, so I'm gonna be staying tuned, and I'm also speaking to myself and educating myself as a voter on all of these tools. And so with that said, I'll pass it over to Vanessa.
Can I just do a quick plug? I'm sorry. We do have an event. I just wanted to also share that we're doing a training in Spanish with our partner, with a couple of partner organizations, DUSA or Dominicanos USA and NALEO Education Fund. Those are going to be on March 16th and March 18th. And it's going to be geared towards Spanish speaking voters. So I'll share that. I'm not able to drop it here in the chat, but I will share it with Emily to then send out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Emily. As Emily mentioned, we are having volunteer opportunities, and we want you all to join so that we can get voters out. Oh, that was late. So if we could all, I know we have our phone next to us, we could take out our phone and tap into the camera and just take a snap picture of this QR code, which will then take you to a volunteer seminar sheet where it will just ask for your name, email, and then you get to pick the dates that you can volunteer with us. We have the 12th, March 12th, March 22nd, March 23rd, and you have different shifts that you can volunteer with us. We'll be using a text-to-text peer platform known as Hustles. You will be hustling with us. So I'll leave this up just for a bit, and I'll also drop the link on the chat.
Yes, I dropped a link on the chat, so anyone can also do that if you're unable to get the QR code that's on the screen. But again, we encourage you all to sign up with us and to help get out the vote, especially if there is limited capacity within your organizations. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning to talk about ranked choice voting. And we hope you all have a great rest of your week. And we hope that this information was valuable and that you can bring it back to your communities. So thank you and have a great evening.